Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's Caffeine for the Soul. And today we're going to be exploring the difference between understanding and action. And what specifically I want to explore with you is which one has more leverage in making a difference in our lives, making a difference in our businesses, making a difference in the world. So if action is the answer to the question, how do I do it? Understanding is the answer to the question, how does it work? Now, most people, when I first present it, they go, well, clearly action is what makes the difference, and understanding is nice, but action is what matters. And the classic explanation of that I've heard through the years is, well, if I throw a brick through a window, the window will break. So if you take the same brick and throw it through a window, it'll break for you too. So learn from my example, copy these simple steps, this simple strategy, these simple tactics that I have used, that other successful people have used, and you too will create the results that I created. Now here's the problem with that, sensible though it sounds. Most things in life are a heck of a lot more complicated than throwing bricks through windows. There are a lot more moving parts in creating success in the world and having an impact in the world than one action. And so one of the interesting things to ask yourself when you're copying steps and strategies is, do they actually work? I remember the first time I really bumped into this was when I was meeting with Hay House before I had a meeting scheduled with them the next day, and we were going to meet at the Four Seasons for lunch, and we were going to discuss this book deal that was on the table. And the night before, I drove down so that I'd be rested for the meeting, and I'm in my hotel room with way too much time and way too many nerves, and so I go on the internet and I Google how to get a six-figure book deal, right? And sure enough, there's a whole bunch of ebooks and courses, and I found one that looked really good. And I thought, oh yeah, okay, I'll read this, and that'll get me ready for my big meeting tomorrow. And the more I read, the more hopeless I felt. The more I realized how unprepared I was, how I hadn't done any of the things that the course suggested to prepare. I didn't have any of the facts and figures at my fingertips. And I actually thought, okay, in the morning I got to phone them and postpone the meeting and schedule it for a month from now so I can go back and do all this. And fortunately, I'd had the forethought to book a session with my coach before going to the meeting. And I was telling him, oh yeah, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to call them, and I'm going to do this. And he asked me one simple question. He said, oh, what's your favorite book written by the people who wrote the course? And it stopped me in my tracks, because I realized that I didn't even know if they were authors other than of that course. And yet, because they sounded so convincing, and I didn't know what to do, I was prepared to take on their action plan before a meeting that, had I thought about it, was probably they were already inclined to sign me because they were taking me to lunch at the Four Seasons. So the problem with copying somebody else's recipe for success is it's like taking their prescription medicine because it works for them. Right? If you take somebody else's prescription medicine, and don't try this at home, kids, there's a really good chance that not only won't it work, it might have some terrible side effects, even if it's wonderful for the person whose prescription it actually is. Now, by way of contrast, let's talk about understanding. So in my TEDx talk, Why Aren't We Awesomer?, I share a quote by the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. A man will stay imprisoned in a room with a door that's unlocked and opens inwards, as long as it does not occur to him to pull rather than push. Now, you could tell him how to move that door, but if you understand, oh, the door pulls inwards, you're golden. That's the power of understanding. And that was really brought home to me. I was teaching a program out in Mallorca, and I got to the hotel, and it was this really nice hotel. We were hosting the course, and I got to my room, and I could see that the sun was getting ready to set, and there was a beautiful balcony, and I tried to get out the balcony, and I pushed the door, and it didn't work, and I tried all the locks, and then I pulled the door because I thought of the Wittgenstein quote. I thought, oh, maybe it pulls, and it didn't pull, and I was like so upset because I was going to miss the sunset, and I called down to the front desk, and they came up, and it was a sliding door. And I went, oh. And once I understood, once I got it, it was easy. Now, I want to give you an example that was really real in my own life, and it was trying to be happy, right? I was a depressed kid. I was a suicidal kid, and I did my best, and I became a very high-functioning depressive, and I developed a series of actions that I wrote about in one of my books that I called behavioral Prozac. And it was a list of 10 things. It was exercise, it was meditation, it was various practices that I had learned that if I did those 10 things on a daily basis, I could stave off my depression and sometimes even feel kind of something resembling happy. And I was really happy with that, even though I knew that if I forgot to take the actions or didn't have time to take the actions, I would go back into my depression. Well, one day, shortly after I wrote a book about behavioral Prozac, I listened to a talk given by Sid Banks. Those of you who listen to this podcast know he was an enlightened Scottish welder, just a very ordinary man who had an extraordinary experience that changed his life. And his teaching is what changed my life. And the first time I ever heard Sid speak, I heard him say something that changed my life. And all he said was every human being is sitting in the middle of mental health. They just don't know it. And I was struck dumb. Actually, I was drinking a beer at the time, and I laughed, and beer came snorting out my nose because I had spent my entire life fighting against mental illness. And somehow, I realized when I heard Sid say that I'd never really been mentally ill. I just thought I was. I'd never been depressed. I just really, really, really thought a lot about everything. And that feeling of all that thinking was depression. And instantly, all that behavioral Prozac went out the window because I realized, oh, I was born happy. I didn't need a therapist when I was born, which meant that all of that thinking that had taken me down that route was actually unnecessary. Now, that didn't make it go away. It just meant that I didn't take it so seriously. And that one understanding that happiness and well-being are our default, they're not something we achieve, they're who we are underneath all the noise, made happiness the most natural thing in the world. And I just naturally stopped doing all that behavioral Prozac because I realized I'd never been sick in the first place. Now, for you, there are things that I'm sure you are trying to take on through action. Maybe you're trying to make a difference socially in the world. Maybe you're trying to make a difference to your company. Maybe, like me, you're trying to make a difference to yourself. And all I'd love you to take away from our conversation today is if you put down all the actions that you're trying to take, all the strategies that you've learned, if you look away from all that, even just as an experiment, and look to see if you can understand how whatever it is you're exploring, whatever it is you're trying to do, actually works. How do people's minds actually change? How do we actually change? How does change work in ourselves and in the world? You're going to get a whole new understanding, and that understanding will take care of every action you may or may not need to take. Have fun, learn heaps, happy exploring, and I'll speak with you soon.